Okay, everyone, welcome. We are live. We're live on Monday evening in this time zone, at least. Um, Thank you so much for joining us and me for practice. If you're new, please say hello in the chat box here. And anything else you'd like to share, what land you're practicing on, and so forth. And of course, welcome back to all of you as well. For those of you who are new, um, this is a guided practice based on the tradition of Medicine Buddha, which comes out of Tibetan Buddhism, and we just kind of like explore touching into the essence of the deity, explore healing, and sharing the energy of healing out into the world. So not much happening. Um, any questions can be added to the ask a question uh, box that should be at the bottom of your screen. And any questions? I know there are maybe some questions or a couple questions left over from past sessions that we haven't gotten to. So if you want to repost those, feel free to do that. Um, as always, too, there's also the option of posting a prayer request as well in the chat box itself. So prayer requests in the chat and questions specifically go into the ask a question. Okay. Um, again, welcome. Tonight I wanted to continue with the work that we've been doing around, and I would say transmission. The practice of transmission. Um, what that is, what it feels like, how to connect to that. This kind of state. I mean, I think of transmission as a state. The state that we open into. And I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily that anything is being transmitted to us, but I think it's a situation where we're opening to who and what we really are. We're opening to our true selves, our most essential self, which is our awakened self, our wisdom, and so forth. Um, we can call that channeling as well, but like that channeling is definitely opening, but it is um, kind of channeling is essentially adjusting our vibrational level. Like we shift up into a higher vibration, right? So in the physical world, in this realm, we're in a lower vibration, but even in the physical world we can shift to a higher vibration that actually tunes us into um, I would say the unseen world, or different planes, different realities, um, realms, so forth and so on, right? Um, that are vibrating, right? That are vibrating on a higher frequency. So channeling is vibrating on a higher frequency, but also what we're doing actually is adjusting our vibrational frequency. Entering into this kind of meditation practice, working with mantra, right, and working with the kind of visualizations that we're doing, we're actually like we're just like gearing up into something a little higher, which explains. I know some of you have reached out and have talked about some of the experiences that you have after this practice, like being exhausted, being hungry, or not being hungry. But something really noticeable about appetite, being really hungry or not hungry at all, fatigue, a kind of fluidity maybe that you're experiencing in your mind, maybe not being able to sleep, but then on the other hand, um, being exhausted as well. So those kinds of extreme reactions and noticeable physical experiences are related to the ways in which we're moving up and down this frequency. Like we're moving up the frequency and we're coming down, right? And when some of you talk about, um, if I can remember, someone talked about, I think last week, not feeling connected to the earth or feeling grounded. Um, that is this experience of not really settling back down into a lower frequency to feel connected. Um, and that happens, like, that can happen in a basic yoga practice, asana practice, that can happen just with chanting. I experienced that, like at this point, just about everything that I'm doing, in terms of like spiritual practice, from chanting to just like doing calm abiding meditation or mindfulness or something like that. I can just experience that elevation, um, of frequency, and of course you get to that elevation, right? And that's where you start picking up messages, you start picking up visions and insights, right? Which is amazing, it's lovely, you know. Um, Quite frankly, that's how I write books, is through channeling. Um, that kind of like adjusting to a higher frequency, and this is often why, for me, writing can be so exhausting. Like I can write intensely for like a few days and I'll crash, right? Because I've just been like up in these higher frequencies, and my body, the way that I react to those higher frequencies is through exhaustion, and hunger, right? Um, which I guess I prefer. Like I would, after these experiences, I would love to have a good meal and go to bed, you know. Um, so so you have to take care of yourself. This is just a way of us just talking about it. You have to take care of yourself. This is intense labor that you're doing. Because it's not just for you, it's for others around you. Because when we're doing, for instance, here in this practice, Medicine Buddha, raising the frequency, what we always do is pull that energy and share it. Like we're pulling it out, we can say from the essence of Medicine Buddha, right? And then we're radiating this energy out into the world, right? And that's an important, really important practice, because we really need to channel more light into the world right now. Just sitting, thinking about Medicine Buddha, opening your mind to the essence of Medicine Buddha, imagine yourself being filled with light and radiating that light out into the world, is a basic practice that is very much needed right now. It's like being a lighthouse or being like the North Star, that guides people. It's like being Tara, right? As you, Rachel Wooden, has written a book on Tara, can talk about, and does talk about in her monthly sessions, is that, Tara means star. So Tara is like a guide for us, right? So situating ourselves as these beacons of light actually has a huge energetic impact in the space around us and in the world, in general right now. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, We have to get to a point where we're choosing light, you know, um, choosing light right now. And we have to consciously do that. Like you have to consciously say, I am going to channel light. I'm going to be on the side of light right now. Because it's so easy to step into the darkness. Um, I feel like there are so many people, beings who, and I actually really like kind of representations of this in like movies and media where you see characters who are really like struggling with that. It can be a very fine line between light and darkness, right? And it actually invites you as a viewer to enter into a discernment like, is this person really on the side of light? And I think Tantric Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism is a really great vehicle and tradition to really contemplate, light and dark, and the complexity, right, of light and dark. And maybe because we have these images in Tibetan Buddhism of beings that look like demons and monsters, but they're actually beings of light, right? And you may have beings, some of the stories in Tibetan Buddhism, of beings that come off as like deities and devas and so forth, who are actually not beneficial. They're not trying to help you, right? And how do you discern the difference between the two and channeling, right? This, what we do in the session is how we discern that. Like you just feel into the nature of something. That's what part of what channeling offers us is this vision into the essence of something. So we're not necessarily fooled by the arising of appearance, right? In Mahamudra, Mahamudra is this philosophy, meditation system, in Tibetan Buddhism. And Mahamudra says that the like what we that our well, it says that our senses are lying to us, not on purpose. What we see, touch, hear, taste, experience, like all of these are just illusionary. And what we're actually trying to do is touch into the true essence of what arises, which is emptiness, space, energy. Um, that kind of touching into the essence of things helps you to understand who and what people are, right? I know people, come to me and ask questions about, how do you determine if, I don't know, for instance, if some action is skillful or good, when it doesn't look so good or skillful. And that's a really high level discernment right there, right? And as I always say that like things are really quite complex, right? There's a complexity and a simplicity that happens at the same time. Of course, that complexity and simplicity is the dualistic play between the relative and the absolute, but that complexity means that we actually have to get beneath the surface of what's happening. Like it's more than just seeing and hearing and watching something. It means that we have to go a little deeper into what's happening. And that's when we're using wisdom, clarity, right, to sharpen that sensibility, to get deeper into something. If you had that right now, it would be, you'd be able to see, like, for me, my experience of the world right now isn't so overwhelming or intense because, like I see what's happening beneath the surface, right? And what's happening beneath the surface is impermanence. Like, impermanence, this is shit happens, right? This is change, this is movement, this is evolution. But it's not that we're sliding down deeper into a hole. We're actually, the collective consciousness is going through this intense labor of lifting. We're collectively lifting, being lifted together in terms of frequency. Now, I'm not necessarily, I don't study um, the histories and the science and magic of like past civilizations, advanced civilizations like Atlantis, for instance. There's a whole um, what I want to say tradition, lineage, field of people who study Atlantis, who study that civilization, um, what happened to that civilization, the science, the magic that they had, but from what I understand from people who do a little bit of study with Atlantis, is that Atlantis actually went through a similar shift, an apocalypse like the one that we're going through, but they didn't quite survive it. Um, and what I've been told is that we're going through that very similar shift, but we're like getting through it, we're moving through it, and that means that we're doing intense labor, not just for this world, this planet, but for this entire world system, right? I think that's why um, some of you may feel this or not feel this, but this is why. Let's see. There's so much attention here. There's just you feel a lot of focus towards this world, being directed towards this world, both the focus of light, also the focus of darkness, right? This is like spiritual warfare. Like this kind of a battle, right? Um, but this is a part of what it means to shift collectively, universally as a collective. Um, so I find all that, just really like interesting and fascinating um, and hopeful as well. I just find this really hopeful for what it means for us, And this is not to say that this is not a painful situation, that it won't get worse, that something else, it's not to say that. It's to say that like we're moving through it, even though it feels like, excuse me, even though it feels like hell to do that. Um, that things like Corona, like forces us to evolve, like things that kind of stress, right, forces a kind of evolution to start happening. um, so take it for what you will. I know some of you didn't come here to get a lecture about the mythological city of Atlantis. It's either going to be Atlantis or the Matrix tonight. So you go ahead and take your pick. So I just want to answer this one question here, and then we're going to move into to practice. I would be curious to hear what you have to say of working with doubt, skepticism. Could it be doubt about the existence of Atlantis? I find a part of my mind resistant to the possibility of some of the things we talk about here. I was right, particularly because of seeing them used flippantly in New Age communities. But I also don't want to check my doubt's critical mind at the door, as I did, but I also don't want to check my doubts critical mind at the door as I did that in my past community and got myself involved in a kind of a undoubting idiot devotion that caused me harm. How do we help doubt serve us? Work with things that stir it up. That's a really good question. Yeah, that's that's really complex actually. Um, let's see. Let's see. How do we get into that? Um, yeah, like that's. I think there's an interesting comment there that we see, some of these things being used flippantly in New Age work, and I completely agree with that. Um, I this past week have been really like um, I've been thinking about pseudo spirituality actually, because people have been, I've been getting like feedback from people about, well, not about, well, the feedback has been an expression of the way people hold this kind of pseudo spirituality. That's just something that is too simple. It's not durable. It's not relevant to anything, but it's just something that they don't really have to work hard at holding on to and experiencing, and they kind of use it. Now, I'm not saying that they're weaponizing it, but I'm just saying that like they're trying to critique you with this very simple, you know, idea of things, and I've had to go back and just unpack the complexity of what they're trying to assert. Um, that's the part of how we can balance this kind of new age use of these really intense work is that we ask ourselves, okay, how complex is this? How complex is what you're sharing? Like I can say, for instance, which I do every session, like, you know, the essence of everything is emptiness and space and energy. Um, and not only can I say that, I think I have the capability to lead you to that experience for yourself, or at least point you in that direction, right? That's the difference here. Like, if you want to tell me about something great, but show me how to get there. It's like science, right? If someone comes up, with some new theory, then the practice is that you offer that theory out to other scientists, and they test it and run experiments and to see, if this is really valid, right? And so we're like scientists. There are these theories that come out of centuries and centuries of practice and labor, and we're testing it out for ourselves. I think that's what Buddhism is in general. It's like this agency for us to test out these ideas to see if we can actually touch into the data, um, that people tell us we should be touching into. Data meaning the essence of reality in this case. Um, you can still be critical, right? Even as you move into all of this, deeper into some of this. I don't know if I'm going to get, I don't know if I'm going to like be able to really get into this question as much as I want tonight, because this could turn into a whole 2 hours, of me wandering around talking about everything, trying to get to the point, and I'll eventually end up back in the matrix as well. So like, I just want to warn you, that I don't want to go to the matrix tonight. But there is something I want to say about the Matrix later on that I think needs to be said. I'm not trying to sell people on the Matrix. I'm just saying that like I think the Matrix is really like quite skillful in certain things. Anyhow, I'm not talking about the Matrix right now. Um, yeah, when we're talking about ourselves, like again, it's like how can I test some of this out, right? And also knowing that reality is much more complex and active than what I'm actually sensing into as well, You know, I, I, this is a harder question for me because I've never been, I've always been a believer, you know, um, I've never doubted anything. And I said, oh, okay. And, when I've heard, especially when I was little, when I heard something, I said, oh, you know, that's really interesting. I didn't know how it fit in to this kind of idea of reality, in the world, but something always told me, this is actually happening. Like there's an unseen world happening. There are histories that have happened. There are other worlds that are happening. You may not be able to sense those things, but it is a reality. Of course, it wasn't until I was much older until I started really developing the capacity to do this, to touch into these other truths, histories, and so forth. Um, I'm not, and because of that, right? Because of like always being a believer and having like this innate belief in everything, I just, I wasn't so impressed with people who had all the answers. There wasn't this kind of blind devotion, which is easy to bring about, to awaken, because we see someone who has this insight into the nature of things and we just kind of lose our agency, right? And we surrender. I just never had that really strong. I have always been someone who struggled with devotion, right? And a lot of people within the larger field of spiritual Buddhism would argue that I have no devotion. I would disagree with that. I think my devotion has come with a fair amount of skepticism, but that skepticism hasn't prevented me from getting into the essence of this. And I'm always in the process, particularly with my next book I'm trying to like unpack that and figure that out for people because this is what people are really wanting. How do I stay in a relationship to really advanced beings, right? And still hold my space, keep my seat in a way and using that language. How can I develop this intense devotion and understand that this person is still human, will still fuck up and do things. Um, you can say I'm not terribly like I am. I'm not. I want. It's not that I am impressed by advanced awakened beings, but I respect. I have a deep respect for what advanced beings have accomplished in their practice. Um, and maybe that is the avenue that we go down instead of like this whole idea of devotion. What about how can I develop a really strong respect that maintains my agency? I see what you're doing. I applaud that. That's wonderful. That's great. I want to learn that. And also, you're still human, right? And in a way, what seems extraordinary, I want to make ordinary, right? When you start making the extraordinary ordinary, bringing that ordinariness into your life, into your practice, that's where a kind of balance begins to arise, right? You're not, when everything's so extraordinary, it just creates a lot of distraction. You get really distracted all the time, right? It's like, oh, there's that, there's this person's doing that. I just saw that over there, and this is happening, and you're just all over the place, trying to, you're like a nosy neighbor, you know. I'm a semi-nosy neighbor. I get really bored with people. But like, you're the neighbor who's like, hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's happening? What are you doing? You know, but when you just start settling that extraordinary arising, within the phenomenal world back into its ordinariness. And there's a kind of balance, a kind of equilibrium that begins to arise where you say, okay, yeah, there you go. You know, um, I think that's the best that I can do right now with that question. Um, you can, when things get stirred up, you just let it get stirred up. You just watch it. It's not, you give it space to be there. And when things get stirred up for me, I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. That's great. You know, so I mean, at this point in my practice, um, I just feel like, um, yeah, the world, it's just everything is just, what's the word? Rich. I guess rich is, I don't know if rich is the right word, but just everything is so, like, I'm more at home with the complexity of everything, right? Um, than I have been in the past. I'm much more at home with that than I have been in the past right now. Um, so I'm asking this one other question. What makes the difference with light when things inherently are empty? Well, the thing is, you're skipping into the absolute teachings, right? And this is staying in the relative when you're talking about the balance between the absolute and the relative is like trying to stand up on a slippery floor or walk across a slippery floor, right? Or walk across ice. That's a good one too. Because it's easy to slip over the relative into the absolute, and that slipping is a bypassing. So when we talk about the difference between the light, there's inherently no difference between light and dark and the absolute, but that's not where we're at. Like we're in the relative, right? You have to balance the real. Now I'm going to get into the heart suture again. This is another thing. At least it's not the matrix. Um, like you have to have these two extreme teachings come together, right? The extreme teachings are nihilism and materialism, or light and dark. Or I think in this case, the extreme teaching is that, like, yeah, there is this darkness, and relatively there's no darkness. Like there's darkness and there's no darkness. Now you have to bring both of those extreme views together and say that there is darkness and there isn't darkness. But that's not the teaching. Actually, the teaching isn't to say there is and there ain't. The teaching is to merge both of these extreme views into one experience. So the teaching is an experience, not a concept or an intellectualization of teaching, right? So, well, another way of saying that, directing that question, is that the teaching is the experience of combining the extremism of their being and their not being together. When those extremes are merged together, it creates a deep disruption, right? It begins to kind of jolt you out of the illusion of permanence, of stability. And you get jolted into a different timeline, which is a timeline of no time, right? Um, you can't get into the emptiness of darkness, right? You can't get into it until you have this experience. until you go through the experience. It's fine to say that there's no such thing as darkness, but that thought isn't enough to dissolve the experience of darkness and the relative, right? We confront the superhuman or superhero ability within tantric traditions of confronting darkness is the experience of emptiness, of the nature of things that dispels, disrupts the arising of all relative phenomena. But until that happens, we're in the relative, and the relative is based on duality of light and dark. And that's what we're working through, you know. In my practice, I can sit, all day long and say, well, there's no such thing as a demon, but when I have to confront demons, I'm sure as hell like defending myself, right, and doing what I have to do to move through all of that. It's not enough for me to say, well, you don't exist. You're just an expression of my mind, you're an expression of emptiness and luminosity. That's wonderful that, and also I use the relative means of, using tools to dispel that kind of darkness around me. So this is the nuance of what we're trying to move into, is well, I'll say this instead, like I would say the closer that you move towards enlightenment, the deeper your capacity to work with and hold nuance and contradiction becomes, right? Contradiction and nuance, like duality, drive this experience. Ultimately, this experience there's no logical way to explain the relative, and I think people go through extremes, and you see this in philosophy, you see this in spiritual traditions, of people just like doing everything they can to explain everything perfectly, and that's going to be impossible because that pursuit of trying to logically unpack this reality is another way that samsara keeps trapping you. That if you're going to do that kind of labor, like you have to be very careful not to let the illusion of all this create thicker layers. Like you're creating more and more layers by a pursuit of wanting to unpack and explain everything, right? And so the closer you get towards awakening, the more you're just like, I just have to hold that. I can't explain, I can't unpack that, I don't get that, right? For those of you who are intuitives, right, and psychics and mediums and so forth, that like you just see things that you just cannot explain and you will never be able to explain. And you can ask all the people in the field and everyone's going to give you a different answer about what it is that you're trying to figure out the nature of. That's just the nature of this, the realm of existence is a level of complexity that only an awakened mind can discern. A mind that's free from duality, free from delusion, who's awakened, has awakened completely into clarity. So you have to be very careful, about digging yourself deeper into this. So this is, I don't know, I don't want to say this is the hardest teaching, but it's the hardest teaching for me, is to unravel the dream, but not get wrapped up in the dream at the same time. So this is why we enter into these kinds of practices with the deity, where it's like, how can I just expand, channel, open, into this higher frequency, right? And how can my wisdom mind become a teacher for me? Because for me, at the end of the day, like it's just, for those of you who know more of my practice, it's like I'm a devotee of the mother, you know, of Tara, of Kali, of Dimavati, Oshun, like just all the ways, Mary Magdalene, like all the ways that the mother arises. I'm I'm devoted to that arising, and for me, I know that I have to be very careful to notice when I am efforting too much to figure out and unpack reality. And I have to be conscious to kind of stop, pause, and turn my mind back to the mother. The mother is an expression of the space, the emptiness, the luminosity. It's just a doorway into that basic experience, right? Well, I say basic, but it is the basic experience is that experience of emptiness, space, and energy, to rest, right? To rest back in that experience. Um, so I mean, this is like extremely, again, I just want to say this over and over again. This is all really high level, complex stuff, and it takes the deeper you get into it, it takes a lot. And I teach a lot. This is why I teach the Seven Homecomings practice. This is why we do Medicine Buddha, right? This is, what drives me because I want to give you all the resources that you need to be supported in this because this is really destabilizing. Like this work is really destabilizing, and you need to be supported in doing this, or you hit the extremes. Like, again, it's like the hardest thing to do is to stay in the middle of these extremisms. If you don't have the right foundation and support, then you just run off into an extreme. You run into nihilism, which is like complete emptiness. There's nothing else, right? You run into materialism, which is to say that everything's real. There's nothing other than this, right? And those are dangerous places to be because none of those extremes can get you free. Those are just dead ends. You find yourself stuck in. But coming into the middle is the doorway into, absolute freedom from all of this. This is a dream. Like this is, and we say that that's new age. It can be really new agey where it's like, you know, um, everything's a dream, everything's empty, nothing is happening. I think it's just really easy to say, but what we're trying to do is embody that that teaching. You're trying to embody the wisdom, I guess, of the teaching itself, and that's a particular kind of effort and struggle that is meant to change you. Like you will be changed if you engage in the real practice, of bringing these extremes together. And you will be asked to, to offer things, to let things go. This is, I always come back to what we really want in our practice. Do you really want to get free, or do you just want to be happy? Right? I'm not saying that like, working towards freedom, liberation is well, actually I'm saying this. I'm sorry, I take all that back. I am actually saying that you're wasting your time just wanting to be happy. Um, happiness can keep us just circling within samsara. You get comfortable in samsara, and I have definitely met people who are very comfortable in samsara. Now, and just check the Matrix references. You'll see that. You'll see examples of that in the movie. So when we talk about freedom, we're talking about, okay, we're going to transcend all of this, and it costs, right? that kind of liberation work is going to cost you a lot. And this is what keeps many of us from engaging in real, like, just putting everything into liberation work, because that means that we will have to change, that we will have to give up things, right? That we will make really hard decisions and choices. But you read the stories of so many great spiritual teachers. Of course, I come from Tibetan Buddhism, so there's all these stories, about these great practitioners. And of course, not all of them that existed, but like some of them did, right? I think enough of them did um, for me to take it seriously. But you read the teachings of great masters, those life stories, and it's like there's always great sacrifice. There's always the giving up of something. Um, Rarely can you get it all, you know. Like when I say all, I mean like you can't keep your family, you can't keep your life, you can't keep your job, you can't keep your car, like you can't keep your like favorable social standing, you can't even keep your social media following, as I found out last year. Um, like things will have to be offered and given up, right? Because what you're going for is a complete exhaustion of duality and delusion, you know. And if you do choose freedom work, liberation work as a goal, as an ultimate goal, you're going to have to deal with being completely misunderstood, you know. Um, and so I think I don't think I know that there have been a lot of people throughout history, and there are a lot of people now who are actually quite awakened, but also extremely misunderstood because we're not getting what they're doing or trying to say, because they're seeing and experiencing something that for most of us is completely outside of our experience, and that's a struggle for those of you who approach this kind of different levels of awakening. And so like, how do you talk about what you experience knowing that people will misunderstand it, you know? But it's not just, it's not just having, the realization that makes one a teacher. You know, it's having the support, the foundation, and the grounding to teach essentially from the absolute, but grounding those absolute teachings within the relative, because you ground them in the relative because that's where people are who need to hear this. And not that you have to teach, like you don't, that's not, bodhicitta is, wasn't a huge part of early Buddhism necessarily, Well, no, it was a huge part. I'm no, I think more precisely, like bodhicitta isn't, bodhicitta in terms of teaching when one awakens, well, that's confusing. This is what I'm trying to say, is that when you awaken, it doesn't mean you have to do anything else. That's what I'm trying to say, right? When you awaken, you can just like get the hell out of here. That's what we call the path of solitary realizers. Like you awaken and you're like, you know what, I'm gone. I'm going right into nirvana. See you later, right? So it's not this huge, intense pressure to become a Buddha, right? And to emanate and to teach and become whatever, a human teacher. You don't have to do all of that, but it's nice. It's helpful when you're choosing to do that on behalf of beings. So, and when you're with people like this, and after this, we're going to start our practice. But when you're, like me, and some of you too, who have studied, lived with, been very close to very realized teachers, to these masters. I would say gurus. Guru is a part of my practice. I'm not saying it should be a part of like Western practice, but it's a part of my practice. It's very personal to have gurus. But for me, when you're with these people, like you have to develop a practice of holding on. Saying like this person is extraordinary, but I'm also in this body and I also have to see that extraordinary practice. I have to embody that extraordinary practice and never forget that we're still woman relative and that we're still human, no matter how much this person in front of me may be other than human for me, that they're still human. Um, there's still some kind of an ego or a sense of self, which is the pathway that connects. It's a connector. Like the ego connects all of us. Like the ego becomes a common denominator, a language that we're all functioning in and sharing, right? And when you transcend the ego, you can't communicate in this realm on this frequency with people that look like you, and are embodied in the same way that you are, right? It's quite a difficult thing to stay in the body and to awaken at the same time. I just think this is why the example in the story of the Buddha is so important for our practice. Someone who did this really intense labor of staying in the body, realizing what the body was and what reality was, to choose to stay in an experience of confinement when the Buddha could have just like left. And the Buddha almost did leave, right? Of course, the mythologies tell us that he was convinced to stay. Right. So who's completely confused now? And I got through this whole thing without mentioning the Matrix as well, even though I really wanted to, but you have to know that I have other teaching examples that have nothing to do with the Matrix. So there you go. There's many other questions too. I'll see what we can do afterwards. What do demons look like? They look like everything, actually. Very simple answer. They can look like anything. They can look like anything. Cars. They can, look like kids. They can look like angels. They can look like benevolent deities. And benevolent beings of light can look like demons, whatever demons look like, right? We have this archetypal, stereotypical view of what a demon looks like, dark and shadowy and all this kind of stuff, but demons can look all kinds of ways, right? And this is why we're developing discernment through channeling. Like you develop the ability to to sense, like there's something not quite cool. Like you can walk into a space after a while, you have this ability to say, I actually don't need to be here because there's something here that I don't, I'm not going to deal with, right? Like you develop, it's a sense, it's a sensitivity because you're feeling that, like you're feeling the nature of things through your practice, through your openness, right? And you just see, I know who I need to be around and don't. Like I'm not saying that people are demons, or that I'm surrounded by demonic people. I'm saying that there's just people who are just not conducive for my projects of getting free, right? There are people who just get in the way of things. Like I can tell who those people are now, right? There is this kind of natural vetting that happens around me, that like people who are closest to me are the people who are aligned with what I'm trying to do, and vice versa. I'm aligned with what they're trying to do. Like there's a match there. And I'm much more capable of creating barriers that keep other energies and people out of my space. You know, this is both living and non-living beings. Okay, so let's start. Let's just transition into our practice. And I just want to continue working with touching into the essence of medicine Buddha. Now, this is something that, you know, um, I'm shaving the sharp edges off the meaning of demons as evil. Oh, they're still going to get you. They still want to get you. You know, it's like it's much more nuanced than these images. Like, you know, a good example is like these like old arc, you know, like these images of the devil, like images of the devil being red and like with horns and, you know, and a tail and everything, you know, which I find really funny. But it's actually not that easy to understand. You know, demons are just not conducive to our freedom. They're just obstacles to getting free. Demons are trying to trap us. You know, so when we talk about Tibetan Buddhism, you know, we have the duality between gods and demons. Gods are anything that's beneficial. Demons are things that get in the way, right? We have to start developing an awareness of those obstacles that get in the way of actually getting free. Of course, getting free means we're cultivating wisdom, compassion, love, right? So anything that gets in the way of that project developing these qualities are considered demons, right? Um, but don't get me wrong. Like it's about, you have to be careful. This. There are a lot of energetic forces that people fuck around with, and then they create a lot of harm. You know, I think a lot of what we experience right now in the world, the violence, the harm, I think underlining it is a lot of demonic presence, right? And of course, this is my shamanic identity, right? This is like the shamanic expression coming out, you know. Um, but again, there's more than one thing happening right now. There are multiple things happening. There are multiple levels of reality working simultaneously, that like it's not just happening in this realm, but it's happening across many realms and planes of existence. This disruption, this apocalypse. There are beings who are choosing sides on all of these realms, right? Depending on what side we choose, right? If we choose a side of light, compassion, love, kindness, whatever it may be, you know, you're tuning in to this massive experience of energy, of light, really, that's about trying to establish love and compassion, right? But if you're choosing hate and aversion, or if you're getting, unfortunately, when you get lost in the trauma, like that's pushing us towards this like darkness, because we start getting open to the things that are not conducive to getting free, right? And if we're not doing what's conducive to freedom, then chances are we start getting in the way of other people who are trying to get free. You know, and that's what demons do, essentially. You know, they're trying to, um, so yeah, we'll come back to it later. Um, yeah, So I do just want to say this. I don't know what I'm about to say, but something's going to be coming out of my mouth in a second. I would just say that so much of my practice and kind of where I come from is from really essentially this kind of spiritual warfare. This is something that's part of my work in this life is to push against the overwhelming experience of darkness for people. Um, I do a lot of that work, as some of you already know, read some of my stuff. It's like a lot of this, for me, has to do with the darkness of systematic violence, particularly racism and transhistorical trauma, right? Like that's where I see a lot of darkness. When there's a lot of trauma like that, there's going to be a lot of dark energy, right? And what I've had to learn to specialize in is working with that really dark energy, and developing a relationship with it and start learning how to move that and channel that energy and cleanse and purify and do all of that. So a lot of this stuff for most people, it scares the shit out of people. It doesn't scare me necessarily because I have a lot of capability to confront darkness and so forth. So I think sometimes people get really scared, they get really activated around this. And I just want to say too that like we all have protectors, we all have guides. We wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for beings protecting us, be it ancestors or angels or deities. Or again, seven homecomings practice, like there's just a lot of benevolent energy around us. The people that I am concerned with are the people who there's been a lapse in their protection, in the ways that they're being protected. That's how we get into, demonic possession, right? That's how we get haunted. That's how, the stuff that we see in movies happens. Because like there's been some kind of breach. And we strengthen the protective energy of our guides by really believing in them, like believing that we are being protected. We strengthen this energy, also through practice. Like this is like all kinds of practice. This is like all kinds of traditions of practice and magic and so forth that's about strengthening the light around us. Medicine Buddha is one of those practices. Tibetan Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism is magic. It is a system of magic that can either be light or it can be dark. Because this is another story about tantric practitioners trying to like curse you and kill you. It's like ridiculous. It's not. It's actually really very serious. I'm saying it's ridiculous because I just don't know why people waste their lives trying to hurt people when they can just get free. But so these practices like Medicine Buddha, and like when we channel light, we're strengthening protection, right, around us. This is why this is so important. Like just sitting and contemplating light, that light's radiating from our bodies, that's like all you need, really. And I know people don't believe in that, they don't find it strong, but like that's really all you need. Just sitting and just imagine yourself being surrounded by light. Again, seven homecomings, right? right? Just being surrounded by light. The seven homecomings practice, I'm not trying to sell it. I know some of you are in love and rage with me this time around, which starts today, but like that was one of the points of the seven homecomings practice, is to get people into doing this practice of protection, without saying. It's about protection. And it's not just about protection, it's a meta loving kindness practice as well, but it's doing a lot of different labor for us if you take it seriously. It's doing a lot of different stuff for us. Okay. But anyway, that's it. I'm going to start practicing now. So I'm gonna shut it off. Shut it off. Right. So we're just going to do that. We're just going to do work with light again and again, touching into the essence of medicine Buddha. So coming to a position that feels appropriate for you as we begin our practice. All right, just shifting your attention down to the seats, noticing the weight of your body, making contact with the seats. And this is important to touch the seats, right? And eventually we're going to touch into the earth, because these are the energies, the sensations that ground us and the relative as we actually begin to raise the vibration, right? So you have support and foundation, but you have to connect to these experiences to be held by them, right? Okay. So noticing the sensation of the body making contact with your seat, allowing that sensation to hold your attention for a few moments. So shifting your attention even lower, touching into the earth. Maybe your feet are on the floor, so you're connecting to the earth in that way, but you don't have to be touching the earth physically, because we can use our attention, this power of awareness, actually to touch the energy of the earth. And all we have to do is say, I am touching the earth. Just think that I am touching the earth through my awareness, through my mind. And you are. You are touching the earth when you think that. You are psychically connecting to the energy and the consciousness of the earth under us. And in this touching of the earth, of course, reflecting on the history of the land that you're living and practicing on. And you're also asking the earth, the land, to hold you as you move into deeper into practice. Asking the earth to hold you. And it's the earth holds you, but there are also beings that actually are holding you as well. So this is the complexity of this, right? There are different kinds of beings who are committed to your safety, your liberation, who are also being invited because they're connected with the earth. They're expressions of the consciousness of the earth, of the land, who arise to hold on to us as well. So being held by the earth. So we want to turn our attention now to the first mantra, this mantra of what I call imitation, evoking Medicine Buddha, Unmen La Sangye Kino Soha, which means, Medicine Buddha, please think of me. But of course, we translate Kino not just as think of me, but into anything that we need. So if we need Medicine Buddha to know us, to believe in us, to see us, to help us, to heal us, then that verb kino transforms into whatever we need in the moment. So men la sangye kino soha. We're going to chant this a few times. And as we chant, this mantra, right, begins to awaken the consciousness of Medicine Buddha in the space around us. And you're just noticing whatever happens, whatever awakens, whatever your reaction to this is, just noticing, this is a part of the data that we're gathering for ourselves. What's really happening when I engage with this practice? Okay. So we'll begin chanting. Of course, you don't have to chant, but you can listen. Okay. So again, Om Minla Sangye Kino. Om Minla Sangye Kino. So Om Minla Sangye Kino. So Om Minla Sangye Kino. So So again, we're just noticing what's arisen for us. But even if we don't sense anything, I invite you just to begin to imagine that the space around you is awakening, as the consciousness of Medicine Buddha, this emptiness, this space, this luminosity, but also this compassion, this love. And just sitting with this just for a few more moments. Just for a few more moments, just connecting to this. Whatever your experience is, just paying attention to it. And I wonder if you can imagine that this energy of medicine Buddha slowly being absorbed. This consciousness energy of medicine Buddha is being consciously absorbed into your body. As if your body is drinking in this awakened consciousness, and you begin to feel your body kind of shifting, raising frequencies, vibration. So we're going to move into our mantra, our main mantra practice. We'll do our mantra practice, and then I'm going to take a short break and come back and offer prayers. So we're just going to do this for a couple of minutes. But as we're, you can either listen to the mantra or chant along, but as we're moving through the mantra, I just wonder if you can just pay attention to your experience, pay attention to your body, pay attention to your mind, pay attention, especially, I think, to whatever you're perceiving as something that may be being downloaded for you into your practice. What are the messages, essentially, that you're getting? What are the perceptions? What are the visions, the images that you're getting? Just being curious about this. Okay? All right, so we'll begin. Teata, bekense, maha bekense, rasa sumunhate, soha. All right. Teata, bekense, maha bekense, rasa sumunhate, soha. Teata, bekense, ma bekense, rasa sumungate soa. 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 Teata, bekense, ma bekense, Raza Sumangati Sua, Teata Beganze, Beganze, Ma Beganze, 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 Raza Sumangati Sua. Kind of staying in this state, I want to offer our prayers for our session. As I do this, I call into the space all of our benevolent protectors, our guides, our guardians, all deities, bodhisattvas, dharma protectors, angels, ancestors, all the energies of the elements, including the land. We call into this space our descendants and all other beings who choose to help us to be forces of alleviating suffering and helping all beings. We offer prayers for my friend whose family is grappling with the prison industrial complex. We're offering prayers for all to experience love as an action verb. Offering prayers for Edith, suffering from health issues, from eating disorder, and unresolved trauma. Offering prayers for waters, water spirits, and water protectors. Prayers for all the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Prayers for all new grandmothers who haven't been able to meet their newborn grandchildren because of COVID restrictions, especially for Beth. Offering prayers for Zach, Cody, and Don Carlos, whose mother is suffering from severe dementia. We're offering prayers for me, to find the strength and discernment to set compassion but firm boundaries with loved ones, especially around my own healing and spiritual practice. Offering prayers for my cat Sito, who is having a procedure to calm his thyroid so he can stop losing weight and not be so anxious. Offering prayers for the Ukraine, for Russia, for Myanmar, and all children suffering. Prayers for all who are suffering. Prayers for the healing of a very painful knee. And prayers for rest, hope, and grace for those living through PMDD. Prayers for our homecoming circles. And prayers for Imelda's health and Gina's health. Offering prayers for my father who struggles with this trauma and mental health and lashes out at others to cope. Offering prayers for Leonard Peltier who has COVID, who's 77, still in prison. Prayers that President Biden will release this man who has been unjustly incarcerated his whole life. Praying that he doesn't die in prison. Offering prayers for Hava Bailey with her mom who is in the process of dying. Prayers for Joe Ward's continued healing, for Eve Islin with cancer, for Miriam Greenspan and Gabrielle Bershon in the 1-year anniversary of their respective daughters' death. We're offering prayers for Noah, Caroline, and their 8-year-old son who has brainstem cancer. We're offering prayers and healing energy for my partner's mom, who just had back surgery earlier today. Offering prayers for a new diagnosis of cancer. Offering prayers for healing and recovery. Offering prayers for Margaret, Pam, and Nancy and their medical providers and loved ones. Offering prayers for Mark, who is recovering from surgery. Offering prayers for myself and so many others who struggle with compulsive and addictive behaviors. Offering prayers for Daniela, who is struggling with a long illness, for Dina, who is working with COVID, for Thor, who is working with a terminal illness, and for the people who love him. And offering the prayers that are unspoken, that remain unarticulated. And pray for also the disruption, the ending of all forms of systematic violence, that everyone has access to the resources that they need to be well and to thrive and to be prosper and to experience health. We continue to pray for the end of pandemic and for all those who experience isolation and loneliness to feel connected and held. We continue to pray for the liberation of all beings, both living and dead, that one day we will all one day be established within the experience of supreme and ultimate enlightenment. May it be so. So just for a few moments as we return back to our mantra practice, I invite you to imagine that as we're moving up into these higher frequencies and vibrations, that we just imagine that these higher vibrations begin to essentially that we begin to imagine that we're radiating light, right? That this light begins to radiate from our bodies. And in imagining this radiation of light, we're also at the same time aligning ourselves with this healing energy of Medicine Buddha. And of course, this light is radiating out into the darkness of the world. We're radiating this light into the situations and the struggles of those we've offered prayers for all the healing, for all the support and transitioning, into the spirit world, Bardo. That this energy becomes a part of the healing of all those we've offered prayers for and for all beings. And just, again, as we were talking about earlier, just sitting and just allowing light to move through you. Just imagining just light just moving through you. Just experiencing or examining what that feels like. Okay. Let me begin again. O te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua te ata begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te spua Te ha ta bacon say bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. Te ha ta bacon say ma bacon say lazo sumangate soa. So again, returning your attention to the seat, connecting to the earth again. And again, asking the earth to hold you, to gently kind of ground you, bring you back down into this frequency. And allowing the body and the mind to come back and land in this time line, in this moment. And whatever we feel that we're struggling to hold for ourselves, just imagine that you're just releasing, some of this tension or anxiety or whatever it may be that you're struggling with, releasing that energy down into the earth. You can use your breath if your breath is accessible, and we can do that by just inhaling deeply. And then as you exhale, imagine exhaling down through the body. Imagine that exhale is carrying and sweeping up all of this, tough energy, sweeping it down, out into the earth. Just letting it go, releasing it. Okay. So we're going to turn our attention to Shantideva's prayer to begin to offer the energy, the virtue, the merit of our time together again out to all beings who need this energy. Okay, we're going to recite this 3 times. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine. And may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. And finally, may I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. Thank you all so much for your practice. I know there are questions. Uh, as since we're already at almost 2 hours, I just want to. This is one more question, so I just want to quickly look at this question. I'm having some trouble stepping into the fullness of my queerness, especially as I'm realizing it doesn't fit into one particular construction or another. There was a lot of talk in Dharma communities from detaching from identity, and I'm wondering about being true to self, community without grasping or needing to fit in the box. I'm having trouble with dualism. How do I find the nuances of intersectionality? How do you find the nuances of intersectionality in your spiritual practice? Well, really, I think the big issue here is that we're trying to fit into what communities are telling us we need to be, or how communities are telling us we need to be. Um, this is part of the consequence and the danger of what it means to start touching into non-dualism, right? Because you're going to start blurring the edges. And of course, we understand this, in terms of like identity, and like these systems of violence. When you transgress the rigid borders of identity, then you're punished, right? Um, for instance, there's so much violence against the trans community because that when we transgress these dualistic boundaries of what, you know, of how we've been labeled, right? You're either, in terms of like, in terms of gender, you're either a boy or a girl, right? When we begin to the old model is saying that gender is either being a boy or a girl. When we're beginning to transgress those boundaries, then that disrupts the structure that so many other people have really invested in, right? And so when you transgress, you actually start reminding people that they can transgress as well, but when you remind people of that, you also remind people of the pain and the suffering that has gone into being forced to stay within these lines, and the ways in which we hurt ourselves as well, forcing ourselves to stay into this line. And so we can't deal with that pain. So we just, of course, externalize it, right? And we, what's the word? This is the point of the practice where I begin to lose, you know, cognition. You begin to, you know what I'm saying. You begin to exert, what is the word? Um, you begin to hurt other people because you're hurting. And that's the best way I can do it right now, right? So in Dharma communities, right, the way that we deal with that is just by bypassing identity. We're just like, well, we're just not going to deal with the pain of the relative identity. We're just going to bypass it into the ultimate, which is still not a way to deal with it, right? So anyway, you know, essentially, like, I just do the work of being myself and allowing the community that I belong to emerge around me, essentially, right? So I'm not interested in fitting into these narrowly conceived notions of what it means to be Buddhist, or Black, or queer, or whatever those identity locations. So I'm just not interested in that anymore, right? I was, for instance, taught a very specific kind of Blackness growing up, and I perpetually transcended those restrictions, right? Because I felt like those restrictions actually kept getting in the way of my liberation and my freedom, right? And I wasn't getting access to certain resources to heal because I was told that Black people don't do those things. Black people don't aren't Buddhists. Black people don't become lamas. Like Black people do a whole bunch of stuff to go into therapy, which is all the stuff that I did, right? So you begin to transgress, right? And the same thing with queerness. It's like maybe I don't know how to define myself, but what I'm more interested in is living as authentically and naturally as possible. The definitions can come later, the labels can come later, right? But this is what frees me. These are the belief systems, these are the behaviors. This is just like what I'm embodying. And I don't know what to call it, but I'm just saying, that this is what liberates me. And after a while, it's not our labor to help people feel comfortable in their relationship to us and how they're trying to label us, right? Um, Again, as an example from my practice, right, is that like, yeah, I mean, I have no idea what I'm becoming in terms of like a spiritual teacher. There's a lot of stuff happening, in this practice right now. There's a lot of becoming, right? And I'm not interested in labeling what's happening. I'm interested in getting free, right? And the more I'm investing in freedom, the more I begin to understand that even labeling myself as Buddhist is a a rigid, a rigid thing that I have to challenge, you know. And this is a really special space to be in, this medicine Buddhist space, because this is where a lot of this kind of becoming is being articulated, like really on the spot, right? So this is a very unique experience. And I know people, again, this is like in line with the question here, it's like people have either two choices, you know, when we're becoming something that doesn't fit easily into a box, people have two choices, right? The first choice is they get with it, and the second choice is that they don't get with it. They're either with it or not, you know. Um, but I have found that the people who are with us in our becoming, in our transition, in our evolution, are themselves really involved in their own complexity and their becoming, you know. If like I just feel like I just really struggle with fundamentalism, no matter where it's coming from. Fundamentalism, I think fundamentalism is like kind of very violent, has been very violent for me, and I'm interested in fluidity and movement and change, right? Um, and that's hard for people to hold, you know, when they're trying to develop a relationship with me, because what are you? Who are you? It's like, you know, um, but again, and this is advice that was just offered to me recently in the past few weeks from one of my elders, who was just basically like, if someone really loves you, then they will understand. Well, they may not completely understand, but they'll get what's happening and they're going to be with you. You know, if not, people will take it personally. They're going to be Your evolution will be somehow a mirror for them. You know, it's so weird. I mean, it's not weird. It makes sense, but you know, right. Yeah. Is the most of this is from Sharon. Thank you, Sharon, for putting the new moon. I'm so bad with the moon phases. It's unreal. This is a really beautiful comment. Yeah, I appreciate the space. It's the most experience I've had with Buddhism. Well, one would argue how much Buddhism I'm actually talking in this space, but I think that my next book, New Saints, um, will just be off the rails. Like if people, yeah, if people think I'm like off it now, wait till they get this book next year. Wait till this new book drops, and it's going to be like, oh, I'm just like going all the way out there and just saying, you know what, this is my experience. I'm just like rethinking Buddhism pretty much. You know, I know that's a very daring statement to make, but I'm actually reframing Buddhism in a way that's aligned with abolitionism, that's aligned with indigenous practice and community, aligning it with the earth, aligning Dharma with the unseen world. There's going to be a lot. A lot's going to be happening in that book. Um, you will be exposed to a Black queer Dharma that I'm in the middle of drafting right now, called The Four Liberations. The liberations of beauty, opulence, pleasure, and leisure. So you have like the four Brahma Viharas, like kindness, compassion, love, equanimity. I'm gonna break you off something a little different. I'm gonna take you back to the ballroom scene and give you like liberation from Black queer struggle and survival. That's what I'm talking about. But that's what I'm doing, right? And people look at that and say, okay, what is this? It's not my job. My job is to make sure that these teachings lead us to freedom. That's all I'm responsible for. If this can actually get us to freedom, in a way it's a theory, but it's a theory that works for me. So that's why I'm sharing it. Okay, so that's it. I am, it's 9 o'clock. You have tricked me into going another 2 hours in this session. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your teachings. I know some of your teachers. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for holding space. Thank you for surviving. I am working on, for those of you who are with me in Love and Rage, I hope, this will be beneficial for you in our new course starting today. And stay tuned for other resources. I'm still working on setting up these lectures. I'm still trying to think about the best way to do it. I promise you I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Say your prayers, do your practices, do your full moon rituals if you have them, but rest, take care of yourself. You can't take care of the people you love and your communities and collectives if you're not caring for yourself and if you're not opening to the care that others are trying to offer you. That's key. There are people, beings, all kinds of beings trying to care for you. Open to that care so that you can continue to care for others around you. Okay, that sounds great. So everyone be well. I will see you next Monday, if not sooner. Okay. If you're in Love and Rage, I'll see you Wednesday and Friday. Okay. Bye.